This week's Parashat Vayigash, is, I think, one of the most deeply emotional parashiot of the entire Torah. We're left last week in Parashat Miketz with a cliffhanger, one of the cliffhangers in the Torah, where the goblet is found in Benjamin's sack, and the anticipation is that he'll be left behind, which is the one thing the brothers don't want, is that they have to go back to see Yaakov and tell him not only does he think Yosef is dead, but also that Benjamin is not with him, and that would, according to the brothers, make Yaakov die on the spot. And so we enter this week's parasha with the word Vayigash. It opens, Vayigash elav Yehuda, Vayomer bi Adoni. Yehuda approached, that's the word Vayigash, approached him and said, "If you please, my Lord, may your servant speak a word in my Lord's ear, and let not your anger flare up at your servant, for you are equal to Paro." And the commentators have really a field day on the word Vayigash, what it means for Yehuda to come close. There are three opinions that have resonance according to other psukim in the Torah. That one version is that he's coming to make reconciliation, that he's done tshuva. The second is that he's coming to essentially exact judgment, that they're going to divvy up how things went, who was wrong, who was right, and then there will be a judgment made. And the third is that Yehuda is coming in for war, basically, that he's planning for a fight. And then, of course, the Hasidic commentaries don't typically go that route. They say that he's coming in for prayer, that it's a prayerful move on his part to come close, because basically he's already said all that he's had to say. He's repeating from last week's parasha. And there's this very beautiful teaching, I think you've taught it before, that when it says that Yehuda approached him, and it says, Bi Adoni, that it says that God is within me. Yehuda comes to the understanding that though he has a lot of sin on his plate, that he has made a lot of mistakes, that he didn't prevent the selling of Yosef, that he caused a lot of harm in the course of his life, that he has some insight, that he has a nikuda, a point of godliness inside of him, which allows him to reveal his truth. And that is what is so penetrating about this moment of great anticipation, great fear. And then there's another moment where that verb is used. Once again, the Vayigash is when Yehuda has made his grand speech, and Yehuda basically says, I'll come in place of Benjamin. Let me be the one instead of Benjamin, which in some way tells the full circle story that Yehuda is willing to put himself in the place of a brother, which he wasn't willing to do for Yosef. And at this moment, then Yosef can't contain himself anymore, and he says, I'm Yosef. And then he uses the same verb, Vayigash, in a different form twice, saying, come close to me, the brothers. And he says again, once again, I am your brother Yosef. And then he says, don't worry, essentially. God put me and sent me down to Egypt because in order to be here, in order to provide food. And I think it's an extraordinary, these two moments are an extraordinary recognition. First, the first moment is that Yehuda realizes that there's a godliness in him that perhaps he had never seen before. And then Yosef recognizes actually there's more of a God plan outside of him, or not outside of him, but the arc of his life contains some point of God at each step of the way. I'm curious, what do you do between those two moments of one, which is a very internalized notion of God's presence, and the other is kind of the grand scheme of God's presence, and Yosef narrating his life in that way?
How much time we have?
You have dinner plans?
It's a big question. I think religious people those of us who count ourselves, who are on a religious quest, seekers. I am constantly moving in these two dimensions. We are moving in the dimension of trusting, the confidence of this, even the search. The confidence that the search gives you within the uncertainty, within the questions. There are moments when you have some sense
Glimpse.
that you're moving in the right direction, even with all the doubts and the questions. There's a certain trust. But you don't know what the big picture is. You know that you're moving and entering in through these doors, and then when you look back at some point, you can connect the dots. But you can't connect the dots while you're
On the path.
on the path. I think it's probably when God says you can see my back, but you can see my face. So one interpretation is like we can see and connect the dots of reality. And I think that's what Yosef is doing. I mean, it's a profound moment of humility for him.
Yes.
Because he is, very, very powerful man.
Yeah.
And he thought he was in control.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, I'm part of a much bigger plan here.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to see ourselves as part of a much bigger plan. It's not about us.
Right.
It's not about us. It's about the role that we play
Right.
at any given moment in God's plan,
Yeah, I think the contrast of the smallness on the one hand of that smallness on the inside of Yehuda, which actually is what propels Yosef to have the bigness story.
Yeah.
That he can, Yehuda catalyzes that understanding of Yosef, which he wouldn't have had he not penetrated him
Yeah.
from that place of truth, place of honesty. And then I think you're right, that we try to glimpse our role in some larger scheme. And Yosef's suffering was profound. He was away from his family. He was sold into slavery. Obviously, he goes down and down and down. Eventually, he rises, but it's not without a huge amount of suffering. And yet, he still is able to tell a certain story.
Yeah.
And I think as we move into this new year, tomorrow evening, there's so much uncertainty and there's so much lack of clarity about what is the arc of the universe, where things will be, and yet this profound parasha of kind of a deep sense of discovery. Which is one of our roles to play is actually discovering that inside place, that place of truth and honesty, and recognizing that, at least according to our tradition, that essence of God, no matter what we've done or who we are, is still to be discovered on the inside. And that is actually a profound catalyzer of being able to tell a big story on the outside. And we don't know what 2023 will bring. 2022 has been a very hard year in many ways. I hope there have been smachot, good things in each of our lives, points of discovery and connection and beauty. The world is looking very chaotic and difficult. And yet, I think it is true that part of what we do in moments on the precipice is actually try to look at some kind of narrative and say, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something to be born in all of this. Maybe I can see a glimpse. I'm not only looking at the back, but I'm looking at the face. And to stare really hard to try to tell a story that can lead us to a place of purpose and possibility and hope.
Amen.
And yeah.
Amen, I said.
Oh, amen. So I pray that on this Shabbat, right before the end of this year, that we both have the gift of finding that point, Bi Adavni, God is in me, and that we also have the awareness that Yosef arrives at with some reflection on this past year, that we'll be able to tell some kind of story that says there's some purpose to my existence and there is some perhaps grander plan.